Hello, everyone. On this episode of Cosmere 101, we're going to dive a bit deeper into Surgebinding. In our Invested Arts of the Cosmere video, we took a brief overview of the known Cosmere invested arts, and I did promise that several of them will be getting their own videos. This is the first of those particular invested arts. Now, much of the information from this video comes from the Stormlight novels and the recently released Stormlight Player's Handbook for the Cosmere RPG. Now, if and when more information about the various invested arts that we'll be discussing in these deep dive videos, as more information becomes available, I'm hoping to make addendum or addition videos to fill in the gaps of what we don't know. Now, as far as this video goes, thanks to the release of the aforementioned Stormlight Handbook for the Cosmere RPG, we have filled in a lot of blanks for the Surgebinding art, but not all of them. In the words of Kelsier, there's always another secret. So, without further ado, here we go. Surgebinding is the invested art influenced by honor and cultivation. So I think of it in my headcanon as cultivated honor. You gain access to this art through swearing oaths to a specific sapient radiant spren or true spren. However, to gain better control of your powers, to increase the strength of your abilities, you must grow in the virtue that your oath is based on. This shows the intertwining of cultivation and honor's intents in this art. Now, the Surgebinding of the Radiance is specific to the world of Roshar. During the course of the war between Odium and the couple Cultivation and Honor, this form of Surgebinding was influenced and shaped to prevent the massive cataclysm that the destructive use of surges created on the planet of Ashen. Now, the oath between Spren and Radiant, between Spren and Surgebinder, I should say, just because you're a Surgebinder does not necessarily make you a Radiant. That's a very specific term. The Knights Radiant refers to the specific organization of Surgebinders that fought to defend humanity from the forces of Odium during the course of the Desolations. Now, a Surgebinder is anybody at any stage of the Surgebinding path with a Nahel bond with one of these true Spren. Now, I mentioned that you have to grow by progressing through oaths. Well, there are 5 levels of Radiant Surgebinders. 5 ideals. The initial ideal is the same for all the varieties of Radiant Surgebinders. By the way, there are 10 variants, 10 orders of Radiance. We'll be discussing each one on their own in this video. But all 10 swear the same first ideal. It is sometimes referred to by the Skybreakers as the ideal of Radiance. Life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. This is a very profound oath. It can be very tempting to give up the fight, metaphorically speaking. To choose to live, to choose to still face whatever trials and difficulties are ahead of you, is a path of courage, a path of honor. Strength before weakness. Just because you might feel unworthy, just because you might feel that you have flaws, and in fact you may, that doesn't mean you cannot still do what must be done, what is right to do. There is strength in overcoming weakness. In fact, there is strength in weakness. And journey before destination. Ends do not justify the means. You have a goal, but how you achieve that goal should be just as important as the goal itself. This is honor and cultivation tempering one another. So it's not just the letter of a law, not just the letter of an agreement, but the growth in actualizing the spirit of that ideal, the spirit of honor, not just the letter of it. Now, once you get into the second pledges and above, that's when each order's specific focus and virtue becomes more important. The second ideal, unique to each of the 10 orders, focuses on the main virtue encouraged by that order's radiant spren and its concepts. This helps provide a greater amount of capacity for holding in investiture without it leaking out of you, and a bit more efficiency at using said investiture. Let me explain what that means. When you're Surgebinding, your soul becomes enmeshed with the power, the investiture that makes up your spren. It becomes fused a bit, if you'll pardon the pun, and that is a pun when we get to the next screen here. But your main ability is to breathe in Stormlight, to inhale investiture and hold it in your body. With the first ideal, you're able to use this to heal more rapidly, to enhance your physical capabilities, be stronger, faster, that sort of thing. But it also allows you to start manipulating the 2 surges that your order has power over. But oftentimes the first ideal is a point where, both because of lack of practice and because of the still heavy leakage of Stormlight out of your physical body, you're still pretty fresh at this, pretty new at this. It's not the most efficient. With the second ideal, you're able to hold Stormlight longer. You're able to, usually through practice, but also through a better understanding of your oaths, be more proficient in the wielding of those surges. The third ideal oftentimes is phrased in a way to face a personal challenge, a personal difficulty that you have in holding to your order's main virtue. But once you swear this third ideal successfully, you're able to summon your radiant spren in the form of a shard blade. Now, the shard blades most shard bearers on Roshar wear are dead shard blades. They can only be summoned in their blade form. They do not communicate with the wielder until you get to the end of Book 5, but I would read Book 5, don't want to spoil too much there. But a radiant shard blade is alive. It is in fact the physical form of your spren. Remember, investiture has 3 basic forms in the physical world, the 3 phases of matter. Well, metal is the natural physical state of investiture, and in fact, Syl, when asked by Kaladin being the main Windrunner character of the series, and Syl being his honor spren, Syl said that metal felt right to turn into when she turned into her shardblade form. But a living shardblade can be shape-changed. With the request of the Radiant and the cooperation of the spren that is the shardblade could be dulled so that it wouldn't accidentally sever someone. It could change shape into a different weapon or even into a shield. It's very versatile. And unlike a dead shardblade, a living one, a radiant shardblade, can be summoned instantly. A dead shardblade, you have to wait 10 heartbeats after you summon it for it to show up. Now, the fourth ideal is very difficult. It is implied that the fourth ideal is a very rare achievement by Radiant Surgebinders. In fact, it's frequently said, amongst the Skybreakers at least, that most people will spend their career in the Skybreakers in the second or third ideal. Very few people get to the fourth. Now, the fourth ideal seems to be themed around accepting that the Order's virtue does have some limits, that you can't always be an icon of that virtue, but you can still try. Accepting this limitation can be very difficult for a Surgebinder who has, by this point, become very enmeshed in the ideal of their order. But if you swear it, you're able to summon living shard plate. Now, just like I mentioned earlier that both in our species video and in our invested arts video, that there are 10 varieties of Nahel-bond radiant spren, there are a multitude of lesser spren, nearly mindless, almost animal-like spren of nature or emotions or concepts. And each of the 10 orders of radiant seem to have a special connection, a bond if you will, to a variety of lesser spren that once a radiant of that order swears the fourth ideal, a swarm, a benevolent swarm of these lesser spren connected to your order will almost adopt you. When the Lightweaver Shallan achieves this ideal in Wind and Truth in Book 5, the creation spren that swarm around her are happily chanting her name the way, well, if puppies could talk, the way a happy group of puppies would chant the name of their owner. Now, the shard plate summoned by a radiant is substantially different from the dead shard plate worn by a regular shard bearer. One, the shard plate of a radiant can be recharged by a radiant's own stormlight, rather than having to wait for spheres to recharge and rebuild a damaged dead shard plate. But a radiant can also, again, based on the way that Kaladin used his shard plate in Rhythm of War and the way Shallan uses hers in Wind and Truth, you can summon it so that it appears on someone else to protect or perhaps immobilize them at will. Now, the shard plate of a radiant, much like regular shard plate, massively enhances the physical strength and durability of the wearer, and also, even if the visor is down, provides the wearer full visual acuity, full visual range of whatever's in front of them. Radiant shard plate can also, at will, dismantle or remove the helmet. So you could be wearing the rest of the armor, but not necessarily the helmet. In my mind, I think about the nanotech suit that Iron Man has in some of the later MCU films. Now, the fifth ideal. The fifth ideal is this mythic, legendary height of radiance. Very few people ever achieve the fifth ideal, is what is both implied and sometimes outright said in the books. Amongst the Skybreakers, Nail is the only Skybreaker to achieve the fifth ideal in centuries. That's what Szeth is told in Oathbringer when he receives his Skybreaker training over on the Pure Lake. Now, we do see 2 fifth ideals being sworn in Wind and Truth. That's going to be a little bit of a spoiler, and those particular ideals will be discussed early on in the video. I just wanted to give a heads up here. Now, with the fifth ideal, what exactly achieving the fifth ideal does is very nebulous. We know that the second ideal increases your strength and Stormlight holding ability. We know the third ideal gives you shard blades. Fourth ideal, shard plate. The fifth ideal, this fullest expression of your order's virtue, tempered by the personal growth you've achieved through the other ideals, what benefit it provides you besides an even better ability to retain and efficiently use your Surgebinding and Stormlight? We don't know. But that mystery is probably going to be discussed in much greater detail when we get to the back 5 books, books 6 through 10, of the Stormlight Archives in several years. Now, the artwork here, this shows the icons of the 10 different radiant orders in the large spheres, and amidst them is the smaller sphere showing the surges that are used by the orders in a woven tapestry of lines connecting each surge to 2 orders and each order to 2 surges. This image is often called the double eye of the Almighty. And this artwork is by Isaac Stewart, and it is in the interior cover art of the hardback copies of the early Stormlight books, in particular Way of Kings. Now, while the cultivated honor of the Radiance is the main Surgebinding art, there are other variations on Surgebinding. The Heralds, and later on whoever happens to bear the honor blades of the Heralds, they are variant Surgebinders. They can use the same surges as the Radiance, and in fact, Each honor blade gives its bonded wielder access to the same 2 surges of whatever order that herald represented. But these honor blades, they're not alloys. The blades of radiance, because of the origins and nature of the true spren as creations of honor and cultivation, the shard blades and shard plates of the radiance, that metal is effectively an alloyed god metal of whatever we are going to eventually call honor's god metal and cultivation's god metal. But the honor blades, they're pure god metal of honor. Now, the irony of the honor blades is that no oaths are required to gain access to the surges via an honor blade. All you need to do is bond it the way you would bond a dead shard blade. There's no growth, there's no oaths, and this has an interesting side effect. Syl and warned Kaladin that when Szeth was using an honor blade, the honor blade used a lot more stormlight than a regular radiant would, in part because whoever's having the honor blade, those blades were made for the heralds, who are massively invested cognitive shadows connected directly to honor and mainlining honor's investiture directly. Well, for a non-herald to use an honor blade, it requires a lot more stormlight comparatively than a radiant would. But anyone can use the honor blade. And the honor blades, as we discover in, as we discover, quite frankly, from the very beginning of the Stormlight archives, because of Szeth having access to one, the honor blades were abandoned by the 9 remaining living heralds on Roshar and fell into the keeping of the people of Shinovar. The Shin people, as we discovered in Wind and Truth and has been detailed in the Stormlight World Guide, the Shin people are led by the honor bearers, the 9 people who would hold the honor blades, practice with these surges, and not only protect Shinovar, but train to prepare for the return of the Desolations. Now, there is another form of surge binding. Honor and cultivation are not the only ones that can grant surges. Odium can directly grant surges too. In fact, Odium granting surges to the people of Ashen, and Honor also granting some surges to the people of Ashen without oaths, I might add, or at least without the Radiant Surge Binding oath structure that we see in Roshar. That led to a war that was so disastrous because of the misuse of the surges that the sky lit on fire. Odium can provide surges. This is, according to the Stormlight World Guidebook, this is what is meant by the term void binding. It's the same surges that the Radiants use, with one exception, but fueled by Odium's void light and granted directly by Odium. Now, the main users of void binding that we see on Roshar are the Fused, although we have seen Odium give humans access to surges on Ashen. But Odium just directly bonds the soul of his void binder to one surge. At least that's what we've seen as far as the Fused go. It was a little unclear whether or not the human surge binders that Odium gave power to on Ashen had only a single surge or not, or even which surge each of them had, because most of the heralds were surge binders back on Ashen, some serving Odium, some serving Honor, before they became servants of Honor on Roshar. But in the case of the Fused, Odium bonds the soul of the fused individual to one of the surges, and also warps the soul into a cognitive shadow that can possess and displace the soul of a living listener and take that body as their own. The altered soul of the fused becomes the focus that shapes the investiture for the particular effect of the surge. Just as for the honor bearers, the specific blade acts as the focus to shape the investiture, and for a radiant, the Nahel bond with a specific spren type is what shapes the investiture. Now, the fused, interestingly, maybe because of their gem hearts, since they are listeners, at least the ones we've seen so far, maybe because of that, or maybe because of the alteration to their soul, they don't leak void light the way a radiant leaks investiture or stormlight. And they are able to constantly use their one surge on themselves. If they use their surge externally, then it does cause them to use up void light, and so they need to recharge, and when they heal, they need to recharge. But they don't leak. Now, Odium, as a shard of wrath and rage, he oftentimes feels the need to stunt his agents, to manipulate and cloud their emotional growth with his rage and anger, or simply to numb them to their emotions to make them pliable to him. So there's no growth, there's no oaths, not in void binding. There's also no adhesion. There are only 9 bands of the fused. That's going to be in a separate video, but there's no fused band for adhesion. That is referred to by the fused in the book Rhythm of War as Honor's truest surge. They can't touch it. They can't use it. It also seems to be largely unaffected by the blocking fabrials, by the power blocking and dampening fabrials that the invading fused use on the surge binders of Urithiru. Now, we see art of the Honor Blades by Kylie King from the interior art of Wind and Truth. And we also see some beautiful interior art showing a almost inverted look at the double eye of the Almighty by Isaac Stewart. Now, there are only 10 bands of fused. Sorry, there's only 9 bands of fused, and yet there is a 10th golden one in the center where the bondsmiths would be. Perhaps that is reserved for Odium himself, because Odium doesn't like to share power with anybody, and as we discussed with bondsmiths, there's a lot of power sharing going on with bondsmiths. But at any rate, these are the variants of surge binding, and we continue on. Surge binding literally involves manipulating the 10 surges or fundamental forces of Rosharan belief. Much as various cultures on Earth believe in 4 or 5 elements, in the case of much of the Western European world, there's the focus on air, water, earth, and fire, sometimes with a 5th element of spirit or void being added in various cultures in both Europe and in some parts of India and Japan, or 5 elements such as the Taoist fire, water, earth, metal, and wood. Well, in Roshar there are 10 surges. There's a lot of importance on numbers in the powers of the shards and their invested arts. We discussed this a little bit when we talked about the shards, how various shards and worlds seem to be connected to certain numbers, whether 10 or 12 or 5 or 1 or 3, or in the case of Virtuosity 13, and 16, of course, because 16 shards. But for the surges, there are 10. Adhesion, referred to as Honor's truest surge, is the surge of pressure and vacuum. When you use Stormlight to infuse something for adhesion, it creates what the Windrunners call a full lashing. This causes the infused item to bind to stick to another surface it touches, to the point where it will probably break itself apart before it can break the connection that is being forged between it and the surface it's stuck to. Now, this can be used for a variety of situations, not just immobilizing a foe, but for hiding things out of reach from someone else, or perhaps even for creating impromptu ladders. There's a wide range of possible uses for it. This is the more physical use of adhesion. When we talk about bondsmiths, we'll talk about some strange stuff that goes on with this surge. Now, gravitation is the surge of gravity, of altering the direction and pull of gravity on the infused target, whether an item or a person. The use of gravitation is referred to by skybreakers and windrunners as a basic lashing. Now, division is the surge of destruction and decay, of breaking things apart at the molecular level. Now, this is referred to in Wind and Truth as dust-bringing. When Szeth first uses this surge, Kaladin asks him, since when could you use dust-bringing? So we will see that at times the use of various surges often is connected to one of the orders that uses that surge or is most famous for using that surge. And likely this is not always but frequently going to be connected to the order whose first surge or primary surge is this particular surge. Now, with dust-bringing, you can disintegrate things by touch, and also, disturbingly, people. You could cause things to, rather than fully disintegrate, you could effectively burn markings or writing into surfaces by tracing your finger and using the surge in minute focus. You could cause this surge to not just disintegrate, but even cause something to combust, as it causes agitation of molecules in matter or even air, bursting that into flames. Given the motif of Skybreakers, I would find it very interesting and would love to see division used to cause agitation between subatomic particles in the air to make lightning strikes. I think that'd be really cool. But we haven't seen that particular form used, although we have seen division cause charred, destructive swaths of chaos in remembered battlefields and Dalinar's visions. Abrasion is the surge of friction. Usually we see it used by Lift and the other edge dancers to go, as Lift calls it, to go awesome, to become awesome. That is to say, to become frictionless or slick. In this state, it's difficult to grab onto somebody, and without friction, you can build up a lot of speed and move very fast if you don't crash into things, which Lift does frequently. Although we also see that abrasion can be used to increase the friction between surfaces and targets, as Lift does in the Wind and Truth segments that she's in. Now, progression, if adhesion is Honor's truest surge, I would call progression cultivation's truest surge. Now, progression has two major functions. Growth is very cultivation. It's literally causing living matter, specifically plants, to blossom, grow, even outside of their usual normal range of height and strength. So this could cause a massive swelling of almost verdant aether-like vines. We see Lift use this to create footholds and a little ladder to climb up a building on the vines that she grows, as well as grabbing onto her own spren. This could also be used to, quite frankly, restore damaged crop fields or cause a huge thicket to form. Regrowth is what is used to refer to the healing aspect of progression. All Surgebinders can use the Stormlight or Investiture that they inhale to heal themselves, but the Progression Surge lets you infuse Stormlight or Investiture into someone else and heal them. This could even be used, as we see Lift use in Words of Radiance. This can be used to save someone's life from the brink of death. Now, regrowth does have a limitation, as does the healing of Stormlight for a Radiant, and as we'll see when we get to other healing powers, there's a similar limitation. The person getting healed, their self-image is going to be a factor in how they grow or regrow effectively. If somebody has a debilitating physical situation, such as being unable to walk or being blind, if they have internalized that physical situation into their self-concept, into the way they see themselves on a cognitive and spiritual level, then that will not heal. Kaladin's slave brands do not heal until he stops thinking of himself as deserving or being part of those brands. Rissyn, who had been paralyzed due to an injury she sustained in her travels, when a progression surge is used on her, she doesn't regain the use of her legs. She had become accustomed to it. She had started to see herself as that injury being a part of her normal day-to-day life. But when we see Renarin use progression on himself during the big battle in Oathbringer, he becomes an almost Wolverine and Deadpool level of self-regeneration capability warrior there. It's positively terrifying. Now, illumination involves the manipulation of light and sound and wave forms. That's how it's described in the Ars Arcanum. Use of this surge is referred to as light weaving. It is a subtler form of surge use than the others. When Shallan makes illusions in Void Spren besieged Alethkar in Oathbringer, the secret Spren, the Void Spren that can detect and warn about investiture use or fabrial use, they don't detect her light weavings. Light weaving is a very subtle and quiet art, so it seems that detection abilities like the Void Spren would have a difficult time finding light weavings. It's very stealth-oriented. Now, there have been several speculations about, well, could you use light weaving to make laser beams? I don't know. We have not seen that used, not in official canon. If you were to read, say, Dragonsteel Prime, one of the non-canon early drafts of Brandon's novels, you might see something along those lines happening. But we have not seen in canon Cosmere the use of light weaving to do anything quite that directly destructive. But the illusions of light weaving can be bound to a gemstone so that they can be mobile and help disguise someone indefinitely, so until the stormlight in the gem runs out. We could also bond it to a spren, specifically the cryptic spren of a light weaver, or perhaps the mist spren of a truth watcher. Transformation is the surge of change, of transmutation. Use of this surge is referred to as soul casting, and in fact the soul caster fabrials are specifically designed to use this surge, and in fact the soul casters themselves are in fact the physical bodies of Spren who sacrifice themselves to become these items, allowing a non-surge binder to use this surge, though with some possible danger. We also see during Shallan's travels with Adolin to lasting integrity, the Lightweavers in their party use a different use of transformation called manifestation to take beads in the cognitive realm and use their stormlight to cause whatever the bead represents to appear. Take the bead of a table and concentrate, the table appears. And it will remain for a time as a physical structure in the cognitive realm. But it doesn't last. It will eventually fade, which is why there's always such a brisk trade, it seems, between Spren that are always trying to sell manifested clothing or tables and such. Now, transportation. This is the surge of motion. Now, its main flashy use is referred to as else calling, the creation of almost miniature perpendicularities to have someone translate or move between cognitive and physical realm. At a higher form of power with a bondsmith, it could be used to also get to the spiritual realm. But at its base ability, transportation allows the surge user to shift their perceptions so they can see into the cognitive realm, see the true form of Spren that are gathering around someone to read the emotions of that person, see the glow of investiture in the cognitive realm, because investiture does seem to glow rather brightly in the cognitive realm. So even if it's not visible to the naked eye, an else caller could look into the cognitive realm, and if there's a fabrial nearby, they could tell that fabrial has a good charge, or if there's a hidden stormlight charged fabrial somewhere in the room, or if somebody is holding stormlight or void light and just not showing it in the physical realm. Next we come to cohesion, the surge of the strong axial connection. This is a surge that allows the reshaping of solid matter, specifically stone, which is why this is called stone shaping. Now, at high levels of proficiency and ideal, stone shaping could also be used on things that are not stone, like metal or possibly wood, just not living material. It has to be dead material or inanimate material at the very least. Nothing that's still alive and growing. Stone shaping also seems to have a cognitive element. When we see stone shaping used for the first time by Venli, she can communicate with the stone, get impressions or images of recent events that have happened, well, recent being relative to a stone, near the stone. And it seems that they are actually communicating with individual spren of the stone or of the stone cavern or building, but possibly also with the great spren stone with a capital S, one of the three great spren echoes of Adonalsium on Roshar. Interestingly enough, stone seems to almost welcome the touch of stone shapers and be happy to change shape. But when you soul cast something from one essence to another, from, say, stone to water or air, there's resistance. You have to convince, cajole, or order the elements, depending on the element you're transforming, to soul cast. It's an interesting concept. Now, tension we've only really seen used very, very briefly in Wind and Truth, because while we did see a Stone Ward in the cognitive realm, her abilities were not terribly well highlighted. Basically, tension, or soft axial connection, allows you to strengthen the bonds between axes, between the individual pieces of material, to make something more rigid, durable, and strong. Now, you could shape something before you cause it to go rigid with tension, thus forming shields or weapons that, because they are infused, would be almost unbreakable. You could block a shard blade with a cloth shield that has been turned rigid by tension. But because we've only really seen it used by the Storm Wall, a fourth ideal stone ward that's fighting over in the big battles of Wind and Truth, I don't believe a particular verb or term was mentioned as the use of tension. So there's still some question there about what do we call tension. I'm fairly certain other edge dancers don't call abrasion awesomeness, but maybe we'll find out a bit more about both of those in the future, because the Stone Ward and Edge Dancer focused books are going to be in the back 5. And by the way, at the top corner is a simplified version of the double eye of the Almighty, depicted as connecting points between honor blades. There is an even more simplified form of this, in which you have a 4-pointed star with a sword impaling the star from the top and going out the bottom. Now, let's talk Radiance. The first Radiant Order we'll discuss are the Windrunners. They form bonds with the Honor Spren. Now, the Honor Spren are those Radiant Spren made mostly, if not entirely, of Honor's investiture, making them, as the name suggests, the closest to Honor. It's also not a coincidence in that case that Honor's truest surge, Adhesion, is one of the Windrunner surges, along with Gravitation. Now, should a Windrunner reach the 4th ideal, their shard plate would be constructed of Wind Spren. The Herald Jezrien is their patron, and their virtues are, like the Herald Jezrien's, leadership ability and the desire to protect others. Now, in terms of resonance, it's said in the in-world text, the words of Radiance, that the Windrunners have far more squires than any other order of Knights Radiant, because of some unique resonance between their surges. While they use the Siege of Adhesion mostly physically, for physical adhesion, there does seem to be some limited cognitive or spiritual adhesion that draws people to Windrunners in the capacity of squire. But there seems to be another blending of the surges with their ability to use a third lashing. Szeth, who had once used the Jezrien Honor Blade to have Windrunner powers, makes note that when he becomes a Skybreaker, he cannot use reverse lashings. The ability to effectively infuse something with Stormlight and give it a gravitational pull so it draws things to it. That's unique to the Windrunners. Szeth also mentions that the Windrunners, by a combination of their surges, are able to sculpt air as they as they fly, allowing them to communicate easily while they fly, both with each other and others. We also saw Kaladin sculpt the air by effectively parting a portion of the high storm to protect a group of refugees. Now, the honor spren. In the cognitive realm, the honor spren appear as glowing blue-white Alethi humans, with their clothing actually being a part of their substance. In the physical realm, when they cross over to form a Nahel bond, they look like miniature versions of themselves from the cognitive realm, but with the ability to shapeshift into just about anything, provided it stays about the same size and the same blue-white color. They can frequently pretend to be wind spren with very great ease. However, it is noted that the more ideals that an honor spren's radiant swears, the more control they have over their appearance in the cognitive realm. Syl, Kaladin's honor spren, is able to grow to full human size when he swears the fourth ideal, and is even able to alter the color of her clothing to a degree. Now, the Windrunners, they, in part because of their ability to attract large numbers of squires, they historically have been one of the larger orders, and they oftentimes, much like the honor spren that they bond, they go by a personal, I don't want to say code necessarily, because that gets into Skybreaker territory, but they tend to focus on doing what they believe is right, no matter if there is a law or code that prevents them from doing something that they feel is right. If they feel that something is wrong and they need to stand up to it, they'll do it. Even if logic says this isn't the logical call, even if law says, no, this is something you can't deal with right now, the Windrunners will do it. Now, this has led to some tensions with other orders, notably the Skybreakers, but it makes the Windrunners much beloved, as they will protect anyone who needs it. Now, their second ideal focuses on that. I will protect those who cannot protect themselves. Their third ideal focuses on protecting even those they hate. Now, the rest of that third ideal varies from person to person. Kaladin, for example, said, I will protect even those I hate so long as it is right. That seems to be the core of the third ideal. But other characters in the novels stated different ending parts to that quote, such as, even if the one I hate is myself, or even if I have to protect people from myself. The third ideal will grant them the ability to summon their spren into Shardblade form. And the fourth ideal, this is one a lot of Windrunners have difficulty with. It seems that a general trend amongst Radiants is the fourth ideal. It's a hard one to swallow. They have to accept that they can't protect everyone. They have to forgive themselves from their failures and still acknowledge that they still need to try their best, but you can't save everyone. Just save who you can. Now, we do know the fifth ideal because of events of Wind and Truth. I will protect myself so I can protect others. A full acknowledgement that the Windrunner, him or herself, needs to be protected too, that they have value as much as the people they protect, and if they don't take care of themselves, then they won't be able to protect others. Next up, we have the Skybreakers. The Skybreakers are the only Radiant Order not to abandon their oaths in the Recreants. They existed on Roshar ever since then as a secret society led by their Herald patron. Now, the Skybreakers form Nahel bonds with High Spren, who appear as, in the cognitive realm, as humanoid outlines that as they walk, the changing night sky is seen, so stars that are always changing as they move are seen through their form. In the cognitive realm, they simply appear as slices or apertures in the air where you can see the moving night sky through. The High Spren grant the surges of gravitation and division to their radiance, and should a Skybreaker reach the fourth ideal, their shard plate will be formed by Lux Spren. We get this information directly from the Stormlight Handbook from the Cosmere RPG. As I mentioned, their patron herald is Nael, and Nael is the only one of the original 10 heralds to actually join their patron order as a Radiant. Nael has achieved the fifth ideal of the Skybreakers. The virtue of the Skybreakers is to seek justice. The High Spren are very focused on initially the letter of the law as well as its meaning and its logical outcomes and loopholes. And so they seek people who have very high personal standards of behavior that hold to a code of conduct of some kind. Now, in the in-world text Words of Radiance, the Skybreakers were said to have been credited with a nearly supernatural ability to separate the guilty from the innocent, although that has been argued that that is not really a resonance, since likely the people that are recruited, as well as the High Spren themselves, are very observant and good investigators about these things. But it feels very thematic to their virtue, so I thought I would include it as something they're known for. In the Cosmere RPG Stormlight Handbook, Skybreakers have a unique resonance talent that effectively allows them to build up extra actions for their turn while they're flying with gravitation, but these extra actions can be used to use their division surge. Now, especially with this beautiful art by Steve Argyle, I imagine that being as they fly through the air, they separate positive and negative ions so that you can build up these lightning charges. But that's just me, because the whole thunderbolt from the heavens is very justice-themed in my mind. Now, the second ideal of all Skybreakers is referred to as the ideal of justice. I will seek justice. Unlike the other Radiant Orders, the Skybreakers do not obscure or hide their oaths. Most other orders will say, hey, I can't tell you the words, you need to know them in your heart. Once you know them in your heart, then you'll say them. We see the Stormfather doing this a whole bunch with both the Colin brothers, but more on bondsmiths later. The third ideal is the ideal of dedication, the promise to serve either a code or a master. This could be following a religion very closely. This could be following the laws of a country or the laws of whatever country you happen to be in, or to follow a master. Most of the Skybreakers we see in the novels have sworn to follow Nile himself, although not all of Nile's Skybreakers do this. Now, the catch of the third ideal is that should the master you swear to change their thoughts or minds about something, or should the code you adhere to change in the rules, you have to change with it, or else you will break this ideal, possibly severing your bond, or weakening it at least. Now, third ideal Skybreakers with their swords are referred to as full Skybreakers. Nile Skybreakers, in part because of the division surge that they offer, are very careful about giving access to power to new Surgebinders. The first ideal is just what you swear when you are recruited. The second ideal is what you swear when you are accepted for training as a squire, and that does give you, as a squire, access to Surgebinding. Only once you have sworn the third ideal with the permission of a High Spren that chooses you, will you be a full Skybreaker. This is pretty unique amongst the orders. And the fourth ideal is when you swear to complete a quest of some kind, called the ideal of crusade. This has to be done to the satisfaction of your High Spren, at the very least. As I mentioned before, there are entities that seem to accept the oaths as valid enough to progress in power. We'll talk about that a bit more with the bondsmiths later on. But once you have completed your crusade, then you have access to your armor and are referred to as a Master Skybreaker. This is the highest level that most Skybreakers ever get to in the current timeline. Nile, as of Oathbringer, was the only 5th ideal Skybreaker in existence for centuries, although we do see this 5th ideal sworn again by the end of the 5th book. The 5th ideal is simply the ideal of law. It is the acknowledgement that all codes, just like all masters, can be fallible, because they are in part created by fallible beings, humans, or, well, singers and other species and whatnot. The ideal of law is accepting the limitations of the law and acknowledging that you have to use your own judgment when the law is not clear, and that while it's still important to hold yourself to a high standard, you need to trust your judgment, not just someone else's. Next, we have the Dustbringers. Although, given how close that name is to Voidbringers, the ancient Dustbringers preferred the title Releasers. They swear their Nahel Bond oaths to Ash Spren. These, in the cognitive realm, appear to be, well, ashen-skinned humanoids who, as they move, their skin seems to puff away like ash on the wind, revealing skeletons and muscles underneath, but then rapidly regrows. The Ash Spren also seem to have almost billowy strands of smoke or ash as their hair as well. Now, in the physical realm, once they leave the cognitive realm, Ashbren appear as branching networks of like burning scorches on surfaces. Now, unlike the high spren who can shapeshift, Ashbren can't, but they can, well, quite frankly, hide very carefully compared to other spren, and they can move across surfaces and appear to be just a growing set of cracks that seems to seal up behind themselves. Now, the Ashbren that we have seen thus far have largely been the Ashbren encountered by our Radiant heroes in the cognitive realm, and they were rather aggressively standoffish towards humans, bearing a grudge about how many of their kin died in the recreance when oaths were broken. But the Ashbren that choose to bond Radiants historically have tended to bond people who are fascinated with how things work, would like to break things apart to see how things work on the inside, but also are very aware of just how much control they need to have over themselves in day-to-day life if they want to live responsibly. This can include engineers, even some scholars, some rather brave but not necessarily thinking it through individuals that will dive into situations to mitigate destruction. But some of the modern Ashbren also have bonded some rather angry individuals that just want to break things. Yes, I'm referring to Malata, the Dustbringer brought by Taravangian. Now, Ashbren grant the surges of division and abrasion, and should a Dustbringer reach the fourth ideal, their armor is made up of flame spren. Their patron herald is Chanarach, the herald of the common man, who's often depicted as a brave and obedient soldier, and their virtue focuses on self-control. Now, because of the combination of power over friction and power over molecular division, the Cosmere RPG Stormlight Handbook has the Dustbringers have a resonant talent that lets them, as they move while under abrasion, they're moving without friction across a surface to go rapidly, but they're still causing those surfaces to have so much internal friction that they break apart into these massive biting dust clouds. It's a fascinating image. Now, the Dustbringers were frequently, with this combination of powers, battlefield artillery, engineers, and strategists in the ancient days, just as the Windrunners were frontline shock troops and the Skybreakers were both shock troops and effectively internal police to keep the Radiants from abusing their powers. Despite the Skybreakers feeling determined to keep Radiants from abusing their powers in the ancient days, they had kind of a grudge against the Dustbringers, and the reason I say that's ironic is because the whole focus of the Dustbringer Oaths is to control yourself, to use power responsibly, and especially be careful with destructive power. Their second ideal is, to control my power, I will control myself. The understanding that self-mastery has to be achieved before you can really trust anyone with any sort of power. The third ideal is, to understand my power, I will understand what power is, requiring the Radiant to become thoughtful and introspective to understand not just the nature of their powers in the surges, but the nature of power in a more abstract sense, whether it's an athlete's physical strength or a scholar's massive brain power. All power has its own impact and its own intricacies that need to be understood before it's used. To achieve the fourth ideal, the Dustbringer must effectively accept the great oath of Spider-Man, that all power comes with responsibility, and the more power you've got, the more responsibility you have to use it wisely. Now, the Dustbringers, much like the Skybreakers we have seen, they also will limit access to surges, specifically the Surge of Division. Now, what the Skybreakers in canon will do, according to the Stormlight Handbook, is that they will withhold the Surge of Division from their Radiant or rather the Ash Spren will withhold the Surge Division from their Radiant until at least the second ideal is sworn. Most other orders besides the Dustbringers and the Skybreakers will allow their Radiants to have some access to both Surges, even during the phase of the first ideal. But remember, Dustbringers are all about self-control and using power responsibly. The fifth ideal remains unknown, although since we have not yet had a Dustbringer-focused novel in the last 5 books of the Stormlight Archives, we should have a Dustbringer novel, which, if memory serves, the focus character of that is supposed to be the Herald Shalash, or Ash. So I think she's going to join this order, despite the fact that she is originally the patron of the Lightweavers. Shalash currently has some issues. I'm hoping to make a separate Heralds video at some point to go over that specifically, but she has been rather destructive about images of herself in art, so I think that she is going to end up being bonded with an Ash Spren before all is said and done. Next, we have the Edge Dancers. In many ways, the Edge Dancers are the cultivation counterpart to the Windrunners. They bond with cultivation Spren in their Nahel Oaths, and these are the Spren that are mostly, if not entirely, of cultivation. Interestingly, these Spren, who appear as humanoid figures made up of ropey vines that make up the musculature of their bodies and faces, with crystalline hands and eyes, and occasionally crystals growing out of their heads. In the physical realm, they look like a growing mass of vines and crystals with a vaguely humanoid face that are visible to their radiant. But these Spren seem to be the most excited about honor returning to the mortals, as one cultivation Spren merchant said in Oathbringer. In fact, while the other Nahelbond Spren, the other Radiant Spren, seem to be rather reluctant initially to start reaching out, the cultivation Spren's internal governing group or circle was actively choosing people to be Radiants pretty early on, whereas, say, with the Windrunners, Syl was definitely a rebel in choosing a Windrunner after so many centuries, and, well, let's just say when we get to the Ink Spren, not a big number of fans amongst the Ink Spren for humans. Same thing with the Ash Spren. But the Cultivation Spren, really excited about this. They grant their Radiants the surges of abrasion and progression, and should an Edge Dancer reach the 4th ideal, they will gain Shard Plate made up of Life Spren. The Patron Herald is Videl the Healer, and the Edge Dancers focus on the virtue of compassion. Now, in the Stormlight RPG, their resonant talent focuses on enhanced gracefulness, perhaps a combination of their constantly regenerating bodies from progression, being that much more balanced and smooth in their motion as they glide frictionlessly. But I also noticed that in the Edge Dancer novella, the title Edge Dancer Lift seemed to be able to understand and make herself understood in languages and street slang she did not, in fact, understand or know. This ability to communicate really seems emblematic of the ability to understand and listen to people that the Edge Dancers value so much. The second ideal of the Edge Dancers is I will remember the forgotten. The Edge Dancers were frequently healers, and not just in battle where they were combat medics or occasionally special forces medics, but they oftentimes in times of peace would set up clinics. They would be among the common folk a lot more frequently than most other Radiant orders. And they would take it upon themselves to remember those that, in the big plan of leaders, the average folk might get forgotten. The third ideal, to gain their Shard Blade, is effectively to listen to the ignored, to not just remember, but actually talk to the people that you try to help. In our world, the world of Earth, history is full of reformers that often think they know better than the people they try to help, and don't actually listen to them. But when you actually sit down and listen to the people that you want to help, you understand them better, and you understand what help would actually be welcome or needed. The fourth ideal, which grants them their Shard Plate, is effectively some variation of being an advocate for those who can't speak for themselves, being a voice for those in need or for the unheard, is how I would phrase it. But fourth ideals tend to be very personally tailored all across the orders. The fifth ideal remains unknown, but as Lift will be a point of view character the main point of view character and flashback character in the Edge Dancer focused novel in the back 5. In fact, I believe it is novel 6, the first of the new books that will come out in several years. I look forward to finding out what that 5th ideal is. Now we come to the Truth Watchers. The Truth Watchers swear oaths with the Mist Spren, who in the cognitive realm appear as humanoid-shaped entities of mist with crystalline masks over their faces and oftentimes wearing gloves and sandals or shoes to delineate hands and feet. Now, the Mist Spren that we have seen come in 2 varieties. These seem to be the first Radiant Spren we've ever seen that have willingly allowed themselves to be, those who undergo the process would say enlightened, others would say corrupted by one of the Unmade named Janat. And these enlightened Mist Spren have bonded some Truth Watchers, notably 2. That would be Renarin Kholin, and also the first Singer Truth Watcher of recorded history. That would be Renarin's fellow Bridge 4 companion and person of personal interest, named Relaine. Now, the Truth Watchers historically were far less warrior-focused than the other Radiant Orders, although they could gain blades and plate and could use their powers aggressively. But they tended to be scholars, scientists, investigators, even investigative reporter-like individuals to make sure that the powerful didn't overstep or break the rules. And in that case, the Truth Watchers and the Skybreakers in that capacity would have gotten along rather well, I think. The Truth Watchers gained the surges of progression and illumination from their Mist Spren. And before I forget, in the physical realm, unenlightened Mist Spren appear to be almost crystalline refracted light, whereas enlightened Mist Spren take on this almost red crystal snowflake form. Truth Watcher Shard Plate is made up of concentration Spren. Their patron herald is Prala the Scholar, appropriately, and objective truth seems to be a big focus for the Truth Watchers. Makes sense with the name, and the reason I specify objective truth is because when we get to the next order, there's a different type of truth that is focused there. Now, the Truth Watchers' ability to both heal the body and also create illusions with illumination does effectively, and we've seen Renarin use this several times, show people possibilities of themselves in their illusions that can heal the soul effectively, inspire and embolden people, remind them how they could be if they chose a good path. Although when this is used on Moash, it causes him to freak out. But that's Moash. So the second ideal of the Truth Watchers is simply, I will seek truth wherever it is hidden. They will investigate. They will find the answers to the big questions. The third ideal is, I will reveal truth to all who seek it. It's not just enough to find it for yourself. You have to be willing to share it for those who are also looking for it. The fourth ideal is, I accept that there are dangers in revealing some truths. Some truths are inherently dangerous for you to share, for you to reveal. Sometimes it is still worth it to reveal those truths. Now, the fifth ideal, we don't know. The Truth Watcher focused novel with Renarin as its main flashback character, I almost said backflash, its major flashback character is going to be in the back 5. And I really look forward to finding out more about the Truth Watchers and to learn a bit more about both how enlightened and unenlightened Truth Watchers use their surges differently. Incidentally, enlightened Truth Watchers also have a strange future sight resonance that has to do with looking at fortune in the spiritual realm. Next up, we have the Light Weavers. The Light Weavers bond with cryptics, or lie spren as they're sometimes called, because they are fascinated by anything that is symbolic, anything that is not literal truth they consider a lie, such as art or drama or plays, even if it's not actual falsehood. The cryptics grant these surges of illumination and transformation to the Lightweavers. And cryptics in the cognitive realm look like, well, vaguely human-shaped stone textured and angled robes with giant floating mathematical symbol heads. That symbol head is what is visible in the physical realm when they come across as a pattern on surfaces, the same way the ash spren are those glowing breaking embers on surfaces. Creation spren make up Lightweaver shard plate, and their herald is Shalash. Although, as I said, back in the Dustbringer screen, I think Shalash is going to join the Dustbringers because of her destructive tendencies in her current state of affairs. More on that when I do a Herald's video. Or perhaps a video on all of the main point of view characters from the 10 Stormlight books when the rest of those come out. Now, the virtue of the Lightweavers is self-honesty. This is separate from the objective truth focus of the Truth Watchers, because Lightweavers, their abilities make them excellent spies and infiltrators, as well as artists and, well, counselors to a degree for the other Radiants. Given that they make illusions, being able to be honest with themselves to keep them grounded in reality is very important. We see Shallan and a few other Lightweavers in the novels having various memory tricks that they have this talent for, this affinity for. In Shallan's case, she takes a memory and transcribes it onto paper as a sketch or a painting, and this helps her form her illusions initially. This reminds me a lot of what Feruchemist can do with copper mines. Now, Lightweavers also have an ability to forge solid illusions, combining soul casting to give their insubstantial illusions substance. Now, according to the Herald Collect, this was blocked and prevented by Honor in early days, but it's not anymore, and there's even a talent for it in the Stormlight Handbook of the Cosmere RPG. Now, unlike the other Orders of Radiance, Lightweavers don't swear oaths after the first ideal. Instead, they speak truths. These truths are the initial truth, or second ideal, is often a simple emotional truth, acknowledging that you're scared in a situation, and acknowledging you're uncertain in a situation, acknowledging you're not in control of a situation. We see Shallan do this when she first meets Pattern initially and says, "Oh, I'm scared." But after that second ideal, the remaining truths are often increasingly difficult personal truths to accept, facing either past trauma or breaking through self-deceptions you have, which, let's face it, we humans are rather fond of our self-deceptions, and it can be very difficult to remove that mask that we put on ourselves. Now, Shallan has had a rather interesting series of truths. I don't want to reveal all of those because I don't want to necessarily give away too much of her story until I do a Shallan-focused or a Stormlight main-focused character set of videos. But she has said more than just 3, 4, or 5 truths, if I remember the count correctly. I think she said at least 5 truths, but she's had backsliding moments where she starts deceiving herself again, or stops trying to accept the truths she said again. So she has to re-swear a few things here and there. But she is definitely of the 4th ideal at present, because she has recently gained, as of the beginning of Wind and Truth, her shard plate of Creation Spren. Now we come to the Else Caller. So far in canon, there is only a single Else Caller in existence right now. The Inkspren who bond Else Callers were, as a group, very reluctant to start bonding any again. In fact, Ivory, the Inkspren of our very dear Jasnah Kholin, he was something of a rebel amongst his people, and there was even talk of, amongst the Inkspren, of killing him and or Jasnah to prevent this from happening. Ultimately, though, he bonded with her. It was permitted, grudgingly, and the Inkspren grant Else Callers the surges of transformation and transportation. Should an Else Caller reach the 4th ideal, as Jasnah has, they will be able to form shard plate from Logic Spren. Their herald is Batar, who is referred to as the Counselor, and the virtue of the Else Callers involves self-improvement, reaching your own potential. Now, hopefully, after the events of the first 5 Stormlight novels, the Inkspren will realize the need for more contact with the humans and more radiant bonds being formed again. In fact, we do see an Inkspren that seems to at least start viewing humans in a better light after Adolin's trial in Rhythm of War. So hopefully we'll see some more Else Callers, maybe some Squire, maybe Jasnah will take some Squires, who knows? But the Else Callers, both of their surges tie them very deeply to the cognitive realm. And as a result, their resonance seems to be a deep affinity for the cognitive, being able to identify the location of settlements or directions while in the cognitive realm, or even when in the physical one, when Jasnah comes out of an else calling, as they call the use of transportation, into the middle of the countryside where Hoyt is waiting for her, she immediately starts walking towards the nearest town, even though it's not visible. And I think this deep connection to the cognitive makes them better able to sense things in the cognitive realm, as well as to move very efficiently through the cognitive realm. Now, like the Lightweavers, the Else Callers do not have a set pattern of oaths like the other orders do. Their oaths are more aspirations. Whereas the Truth Caller has to confront personal, often painful truths, the Else Caller has to set goals for themselves, which, much like we saw with the Skybreakers, are monitored by their Inkspren. Once the Inkspren is satisfied that an aspiration has been met, that ideal is considered complete. And power grows. Now, Jasnah is an amazing character, but we have not yet had her full backstory or flashback yet. We've seen some very fascinating looks at her character and past when she was in the flashback about Gavilar's assassination and her actions and activities then, her actions and tutelage of Shallan, and her interactions with the other main Radiants in Urithiru from Oathbringer onward, in particular her butting heads with Kaladin. I enjoyed that scene very much. And also her interactions with Hoyt, who she enters into a romantic relationship with. We don't know what her aspirations were. We know that she's achieved at least the second, third, and fourth ideal. But she had a major personal setback in Wind and Truth. And I would be very interested to see where she goes from here. And I would very much be interested to learn what her aspirations were and what her fifth aspiration, her fifth ideal, will be. But at any rate, the Else Callers are masters of the cognitive realm, and because of their highly individualized ideals, Else Callers are pretty diverse as a group. They could be scholars, soldiers, politicians, combinations thereof, but frequently they were the logistics and strategy masters of the early Radiant War efforts in the old days. Oh, and incidentally, the Inkspren look like, well, humanoid, jet black people in the cognitive realm, as if they are made of oil, because they have this almost iridescent sheen to their ink nature. In the physical realm, they look exactly like they did in the cognitive, just tiny. And they're not able to change their shape at all. They can change their size, but not their shape. It's interesting, the Honor Spren are capable of changing their shape, but the rest of the Spren seem unable to do that completely. I find that very interesting. All right, now, at any rate, let us leave the mystery of the Else Callers and continue. Now we come to the Will Shapers. These Radiants bond with Light Spren, also called Reachers, and the Light Spren look like humans made out of bronze metal in the cognitive realm. But in the physical realm, they actually look like these mini little comets with these trails of light as they move, and they tend to pulsate with beats and rhythms. Now, Will Shapers that achieve the fourth ideal form Shardplate out of Joy Spren. Their patron herald is Kalek, the builder, and freedom is their virtue. Seeking it for those that don't have it, working to ensure it for everyone around them. Freedom is their big focus and concern. As a result, freedom means something a little different to everyone, and the Will Shapers were said in the in-world text Words of Radiance to be incredibly eclectic in their membership. Most of the other orders had a general mindset or focus. Even the else callers, who had a lot of wide-ranging particular focuses or foci within their group, the else callers are all very personally ambitious individuals. There's a common trait there. The will shapers were very diverse in their outlooks and activities, and sometimes were seen as a little chaotic by the other orders. Their resonance, according to the talent we saw in the Stormlight Handbook, is to strengthen the resolve of others to resist manipulation and domination and influence. Now, their surges are transportation and cohesion. This also provides them with the ability to not only move about, which is a very in keeping with the theme of freedom, but also to literally make a hole in walls, to build things up, or to break through walls as they wish. Again, very thematically in keeping. Now, the second ideal of the will shapers is to seek freedom for those in bondage. Pretty direct, pretty self-explanatory, and in fact, Lightspren will refuse to even consider anyone as a potential bond mate that supports any sort of forced servitude or slavery of any kind. During the original history of the Radiants, all Radiants were humans, but with the Recreants and the death of so many Lightspren, modern Lightspren tended to be hesitant to bond humans. In fact, if you want to be a human will shaper these days, according to the Stormlight Handbook, you effectively have to be very, very much against slavery in any and all of its forms, and prove that to the will shaper spren. Most will shapers these days tend to be singers, or rather, the listeners who have broken from the fused, who do not wish to serve odium, that simply wish to be free and live and walk their own path. And we actually see that borne out in this beautiful art by Steve Argyle again. Now, the third ideal is the promise to fight oppression. It's one thing to liberate individual people from their situation of servitude or bondage, but to fight those who place people in bondage is another ideal and obligation of the will shaper. The fourth ideal, as with all the others, is very personalized, but the general trend tends to be that don't make it about you. Oftentimes in helping somebody, there can be a certain amount of self-aggrandizement, certain patting yourself on the shoulder about this, but the fourth ideal requires the will shaper to acknowledge that people need to be able to maintain their own freedom without me, and that what you really need to be doing as a will shaper is to provide those you want to help keep their freedom with what they need, what they feel is important too. The fifth ideal is again unknown. We've had a will shaper focused novel in The Rhythm of War, but due to the narrative situation that Venli was in at the time, she couldn't really explore the transportation surge very much without getting caught. But we saw some pretty cool stuff with the stone shaping aspect of cohesion and the connection, possibly with the great spren stone, in the very world of Roshar itself. But hopefully we will see the fifth ideal revealed in a later novel. And now the Stone Wards. Stone Wards bond with the Peak Spren. Peak Spren in the cognitive realm look like humans made out of rock with glowing cracks of magma under their skin, frequently depicted as dressing like the Unkalaki Horneaters of the Horneater Peaks. Now, in the physical realm, they sometimes take the form of pebbles that can break apart into tiny versions of their cognitive aspect. And as they move, they tend to dive into rock and move through it like it's air and break out of rock and pebbles on the other side. They grant Stone Wards these surges of cohesion and tension. Now, we've only really seen 2 Stone Wards named. Only one of them have we really been able to see in action in the battlefield. That would be the Stone Ward known as the Storm Wall in Wind and Truth. But we do know that when a Stone Ward reaches the 4th ideal, they form Shardblade from Bind Spren, and their patron herald is Talonel, or Taln. And he's going to be a point of view character in the back 5 Stormlight books. I think he's going to join his own order here. Because as the in-book text, when Words of Radiance said, no herald exemplified the virtues of their order as well as Talonel. I cannot pronounce that name today. I'm just going to call him Taln. And the virtues are steadfastness, dependability. Taln held off the desolations for thousands of years on his own, at great personal, emotional, physical, and mental injury. But he did it. He never broke. And the Stonewards, they don't break. In fact, their resonance seems to be immovability, a combination of manipulating the environment and things that they're wearing around them to make themselves virtually immovable in the battlefield, as well as to inspire others to stand fast and work together. Teamwork is another major element of Stoneward virtue. Now, the Stonewards are oftentimes very cheerful, very helpful, eager to help others, eager to put others' needs first, and they are consummate soldiers. In fact, there's a more than friendly rivalry between the Stonewards and the Windrunners. I say more than friendly, I mean that it is very friendly, but still very big, very much a rivalry about who's really got the best soldiers. The Windrunners are very good as a cohesive unit, very much a family unit in Bridge 4, very disciplined. The Stonewards are very disciplined too, and they stand together. They work together very well. They support each other and others. The second ideal of the Stoneward is, I will step forward while others fall back. You will be like Town. You will be the one that doesn't break. You'll be the one that stands tall. You'll be there when people need you. The third ideal is, I will be the foundation on which others can build. First ideal is about helping your virtue come to the fore, about you being able to do what others can't. The third ideal is about you being that bedrock that others can depend on and can work with, and you can help them grow stronger together. The fourth ideal is again idealized, not idealized, bad pun there, unintentional. The fourth ideal is highly personalized for all the orders, but effectively for the Stonewards, it's an acknowledgement that, hey, I need help too. I need to make sure I self-care, that I seek and accept help for myself. Otherwise, there's no way I can actually be that solid foundation for others and stand while others fall back. In many ways, it resembles the Windrunner fifth ideal, which makes me very curious about what the Stoneward fifth ideal is going to be. Again, the Stoneward focus novel and its point of view character Town is going to be in the back 5, and I look forward to it with great eagerness. But note on tension before we leave the Stonewards. We talked a little bit about cohesion as the stone shaping. With tension, they're able to literally turn cloth into shields or armor, or rapidly shape it and then harden it into weapons. They're able to effectively make someone else wear armor if they're just wearing cloth, or do some pretty interesting things with ribbons and other flexible items to extend the reach of their weapons, or turn that into weapons, as we saw the Stormwall use. I also wonder if maybe they could, like the Abrasion users, the Dustbringers and the Edge Dancers, I wonder if they could make tension go away as well, turn rigid things like regular armor or walls brittle. Something to think about. But now, onward to our 10th and final order. The 10th and final order of the Knights Radiant is, quite frankly, the most unique and overpowered of all the orders. It is for this reason why, in the Stormlight Handbook, Bondsmiths are not a playable Radiant path. Maybe there'll be a supplement about that later, but here's the thing with Bondsmiths. There can only ever be 3 at one time, because there are only 3 specific spren that can give the Bondsmith bond. I know that was kind of an interesting play on words I did by accident there. The 3 spren that Honor and Cultivation created were Stormfather, the Sibling, and the Night Watcher. These were created with Mostly honor for Stormfather, using some of the essence of the wind with a capital W. The Night Watcher made with mostly cultivation's investiture with some of the essence of night with a capital N. And the Sibling, which is in the physical realm the actual tower city of Urithiru. And he was made with both honor and cultivation and the essence of stone with a capital S. Now, it was mentioned in Wind and Truth that wind, stone, and night were the original entities that granted the bondsmith powers. But after the creation of honor and cultivation's children's spren, with some of these older echoes of Adonalsium's essences, they seem to go dormant. The night left. No idea what that means. Interestingly, cultivation, who found the Song of Night very fascinating. I think night and cultivation had something in common, just like wind and honor had something in common. Night left, and, well, cultivation's going to pull a runner at some point. The wind was focused on protection, which is a big thing for the Radiants close to honor, the wind runners. The cultivation motif is to nurture, and I think night is probably the nurturing one of those. Whereas the third of these spren, the stone, I think the stone is supposed to shroud, to shield, or cover up. Now, these three spren are massively powerful. And in fact, they are capable of accepting the oaths sworn by other Radiants in the place of a shard, because of how much power is imbued in these three spren. Stormfather is the one that regularly accepts the oaths, not just of his own bondsmith Dalinar, but of the various windrunners that we see, and of even a few other Radiants like the Will Shapers, or at least of Eshonai when she briefly was Radiant. And cultivation seems to be able to do so as well, because we do see a female voice speaking to Venli when she gets her second ideal finally accepted. And this is often shown with capital letter text in the novels, and the only people we've seen with capital letter texts have been shards, the Stormfather, and interestingly, both Syl and Dalinar. There's something going on there, but I'm getting off topic. I'm already at nearly an hour and a half in this video. I'll save that for another one. The bondsmiths are granted the surges of tension and adhesion. Now, they can use them the same way that the Stonewards use tension or the Windrunners use adhesion in a physical sense, but the bondsmith's powers are also very cognitive and especially spiritual. Spiritual adhesion, sometimes referred to as bondsmithing, can be used to forge connections to people, to communicate in their language, to understand them, to alter the relationship of people to the planet that they're on, for example. Tension and adhesion together with this spiritual element can be used to repair inanimate objects, and each bondsmith is able to summon the light of their associated spren. Stormfather, being Honor's shadow, is able to generate Stormlight. Dalinar can summon Stormlight. Navani, who becomes the bondsmith of the tower of the Sibling, she can summon the Sibling's hybrid tower light, a hybrid of honor and cultivation's investiture. And by the way, tower light works just as well as Stormlight, although it doesn't create quite that same need to move that Stormlight does, but it drains out of radiance faster when they're out of the tower. In fact, it dissipates really rapidly when they're out of the tower. Now, cultivation, her investiture is Lifelight. My speculation is that the Night Watcher's bondsmith, and I hope we will see one eventually, will be able to use and generate this light, and that hopefully the Radiants will be able to learn how to use it as well. We have one Radiant that can use it, but that's due to some strange boon and curse things that occurred for Lift in the Valley of Cultivation. Now, Glory Spren are often seen gathering around Dalinar during major moments. These massive, powerful spren do not form shard blades. I think that these three bondsmith spren are just too big and massive to really become shard blades. Plus, unlike the other spren who have to stay close to their radiance, these spren are so big and powerful, they don't have to be close by to their radiance to communicate with them telepathically. The Stormfather is in the High Storm, but he can still communicate with Dalinar whenever, wherever. The Night Watcher is in the valley with cultivation, but she can, I think, be seen wherever there is life and growing things. And the Tower, well, the Tower is the Tower. The sibling is able to know everything that's going on in the Tower, to constantly keep every Fabrial and Radiant powered with Tower Light while they're in the Tower. I think that the Night Watcher is going to bond a Radiant in the back 5. For a variety of reasons that deal with big spoilers I don't want to reveal too much of. But I got off topic. Glory Spren. We were on Glory Spren. We do see Dalinar have Glory Spren gather around him the way we see other Armor Spren gather around other Radiant types. But I honestly don't know if he would ever, or any bondsmith would ever get Shard Plate when they reach the 4th ideal. Dalinar himself only ever reached the 3rd ideal. Now, because of the power of his Spren, the 3rd ideal of a bondsmith is in power equivalent to the 4th ideal of any other Radiant, at least for the purposes of overcoming a suppressor Fabrial. So Raboniel and other fused scholars speculated. But I don't know. I think it'd be really cool for a bondsmith to have like glowing Glory Spren armor, but that's just me. Also, on the Stormlight playing card deck, there was a card that listed off the other armor Spren of other orders and included Glory Spren in the 10th spot. So maybe that was just for symmetry. I don't know. But I'm putting it up there because it looks cool. Now, the Herald of the Bondsmiths is Ishar. And Ishar is terrifying when you meet him in Rhythm of War and again in Wind and Truth. The virtue of the Bondsmiths is uniting others, unity. In fact, the 2nd ideal is I will unite instead of divide. I will bind men together. And their surges are very thematic of this. Not to divide, not to tear apart, but to strengthen and bind together. The 3rd ideal is I will take responsibility for what I have done. This is a very deeply personal acknowledgement of I have done wrong, as all people do. But I will learn from my mistakes. I will take responsibility and not try to give other people, try to blame other people for what I've done. I've done what I've done. I'll take responsibility for that, and I'll learn. I'll do better. Because as Dalinar learns, the most important step a man can take is the next step. And the 4th ideal, according to the Stormlight Handbook, is some variation of accepting that all life is precious. Negotiations will break down. Sometimes you will have to fight, but you will have to remember that even your enemy's life is precious, just as your friends are. The 5th ideal? No idea. But I'm betting it's going to be something absolutely epic and cosmic and profound. And now that we've finished out all of the Radiant Orders and talked a bit about the Surges and how the Nahel bond works, in particular since we ended on the true spiritual leaders of the Radiant Orders, the Bondsmiths, it's time to close out for this video. And next time on Cosmere 101, we'll be beginning a dive into the metallic arts by looking at hemalurgy and hemalurgic construct beings. Until next time, everybody take care out there, and I think by the time this recording is up, it will be Labor Day weekend, so have a great holiday weekend, everybody. See you next time.